Hello everyone, welcome to ET Manufacturing Big Bite session. And today in this special session, we are going to discuss about how B2B e-commerce and digital technologies are transforming the Indian manufacturing industry. With India being in radar of global manufacturing industry, it's imperative that Indian manufacturing companies adopt more efficient supply chain process and B2B e-commerce can, I personally believe, can truly transform this and add value to our overall supply chain. And to discuss more on this, the present state of Indian manufacturing industry, the digital transformation, and how B2B e-commerce can add so much value to the overall ecosystem. We have with us Mr. Rahul Garg, who is founder and CEO of Moglix. Moglix is pioneer in the B2B e-commerce space in India. Thank you so much, Rahul. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and talking to us today.
No, absolutely. My pleasure to be on the platform and more platforms which can encourage manufacturing in India. It is fantastic for the industry.
True, true. So I think in manufacturing industry needs a lot of influencer as well because I think people are not joining manufacturing industry. So that's what worries a lot of manufacturers around the world. So we have to make it cool. And I think that e-commerce or on-demand manufacturing, that kind of thing add a lot of value to the manufacturing and can attract a lot of young engineers, I personally believe.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
to start with, Rahul, I would just like to understand from you, what's the present state of manufacturing industry in India? Where exactly it is heading according to you? Because in India also, our government is pushing from service-driven economy to manufacturing-driven economy, and I'm sure it will create a lot of opportunities. So your take on overall present state of Indian manufacturing industry?
No, I think it is very exciting time in the manufacturing industry. Many people talk about both in India as well as globally that it's the next 2 to 3 decades are about India. And I think if India is to go towards the Viksit Bharat, which is the ambition set forward, it can't happen just with a service-led economy. So it is important that manufacturing continues to play, along with infrastructure, a significant role in uplifting the economy. So I think there is definitely a lot of government and policy related push, but also there is I would say, a sense of optimism, which may not have been there if you talk a decade back when China was booming. But I think today there is a lot of sense of optimism post COVID when people are looking at how do I expand my capex, firstly to capture as much of the domestic market, but also start to become at least some share of the global supply chain. I don't think we are yet there in terms of like capturing a significant portion of global supply chain, but I think as we continue to improve our domestic manufacturing capabilities, the quality standards, the variety of products that we are manufacturing, and different supply chains that we are setting on indigenization of different product categories, I think our domestic manufacturing will be ready to export more and more to the world, and that's going to be very exciting over the next couple of decades.
True. I think, as you said, that there is a sense of optimism in Indian manufacturing community, and next 2 decades are extremely important. But at this moment, as we know, the overall contribution of India's manufacturing to the GDP is about 16-17%, and the government is also aiming that it should be at least 20% or 25% going forward. What will it take to reach to that level? What kind of policy reform, what kind of mindset are needed, skill set are needed to reach there, according to you?
No, I think see, as a country, we have moved forward into the right direction. I think PLI became a very interesting dimension. GST, in terms of enabling supply chain costs to be optimized, are two definitely big milestones, and then digitization. So these three have been very interesting trends over the last 10 years. And we have seen it as Moglix, we celebrate 10 years of starting the company. So I think many of these transitions we saw over the last 10 years. I think what is required, which is continuously important, is that post-COVID, it's kind of a global supply chain war at play, right? So in past, it was okay for country to design its policies kind of bottoms up, think about how they can incrementally improve the different elements of enablement, whether PLI is one form of incentive enablement. Today, we know India Semiconductor Mission, which is around capex enablement. And so there is going to be different forms of enablement that are required. The raw material, the critical raw material is the third form of enablement, right? How do you think about taking positions all across the world, because those critical minerals are going to feed into your supply chain in the domestic manufacturing. And if you don't have access to them, then you'll always be a downstream manufacturing. You will not play enough upstream into the manufacturing value chain. So I think the way I think about it is that on a every industry, every category basis, we need to be thinking about how do we take a certain percentage of global supply chain and a significant portion of the domestic supply chain. And that's where the strategy is not just broad based, but it is like, what do I do today to make sure that pharmaceutical industry in India is like 100% indigenized? And then we are doing sufficient value addition. We are thinking about how we can feed the global south and many of those dimensions. Automotive, same answer. Say steel, similar question. Steel downstream products, there is a lot of opportunity. Solar, again, green hydrogen. You pick an industry, semiconductor. I think there needs to be a very targeted industry by industry strategy of how do we play in global supply chain and how are different countries enabling manufacturing in those countries. I mean, we have known China goes about sort of almost saying that I will give you land free, building free, capex also may be free, and then you just manufacture. And therefore, the cost structure, capital structure, tax structure, it completely changes. Now, you
Right.
can't go in and compete in global supply chain if there is a sovereign nation fighting on one side and a private player fighting on the other side from India, right? So I think therefore, we need to call them out of some of those unfair trade practices, but also think about like what is going to be our strategy as a country to be able to play and win in many of these global supply chains.
Right, right. So you spoke about supply chain and e-commerce plays a key role in overall supply chain of India. So it's been 10 years you started Moglix, and what kind of growth have you seen in the Indian manufacturing industry in terms of adoption of new technologies or new business models such as e-commerce and on-demand manufacturing, such kind of things.
I think it is interesting because I remember when I started and there were like literally a saying ki this may not happen
Yeah.
because there are going to be like so much of people element, misaligned incentives, uh, complexity of supply chain, complexity of technical knowledge, complexity of payment networks, complexity of working capital, so on and so forth, right? So I think there was a almost I would say till 2017, it was like everyone basically gave you input. I mean, 90% people told you that it may never happen or it may you may not be able to build a large company, right? So I think only post GST we started to see some amount of positive sentiment around the industry, and then we just went about on rapid execution. I think today the conversations have evolved, so people are no longer thinking about whether this will happen or not. People are asking how and what can I do, and there is enough sort of like a growth thinking, there is a cost optimization thinking, that people have more openness on conversations and trials. I don't think we have gone mainstream yet. I mean, today, if I think about, I think e-commerce in consumer has gone mainstream. I don't think we are playing in the prime time yet. I think that to me is still prime time is probably 2030. So I think which is okay because consumers started like revolution started maybe sometime in 2010 or 2012,
Yeah.
and it started to hit mainstream from 2015 or but in COVID, actually, I think it just completely went very, very rapidly, right? So we saw grocery and many of the categories which were still struggling pre-COVID to suddenly get accelerated, or food delivery getting accelerated, right? They were not as large categories pre-COVID. So I would
Right.
say they took 10 to 15 years. I think so. For me, the next decade are going to be the prime time of Moglix. The past decade was all building kind of capabilities, building teams, building infrastructure, but this is the prime time play, and it's a complex problem to solve. Honestly, I think looking back, it was many of what people were saying, those were actually significant challenges, and we had to go through our own journey of trying to solve that as a ecosystem, as almost a entire category creator. We had to solve a lot of those challenges versus having tens of companies trying to solve it, because most of them gave up trying to solve this problem.
So as you rightly said that, next decade might be the mainstream time for the B2B e-commerce, but do you still feel that, let's just take it an example of a owner who is running like 100 crore company, job shop with some CNC machining parts and all. Are they still buying, some sort of components, goods, or any kind of not so standard parts online? Are they still doing it?
They are open to it. As I said, it's not prime time yet. Some of them
Yeah,
might be buying, some of them are checking prices, some of them are checking availability. So all of that is happening, right? And the awareness is there. I would say
yeah,
awareness is starting to be significant, I would say, because they see it in their daily lives. The amount of consumer commerce penetration continues to increase, and therefore, it's kind of natural for many of them to ask that what am I doing in the procurement and how am I buying kind of these products and what can I do better. So I think so we are starting to cross the awareness to early adoption to kind of looking at mainstream. And um, so have all of them shifted? I mean, we are less than 1% of the market on this, right? Versus consumer commerce, which is probably 15-ish percentage is what I believe it has gotten to. So there is at least an opportunity, which is because when you start to hit 10%, I think 10% of the market, it's a kind of a magical number, because that is when you say that this has arrived mainstream. And it may not go to more than 20-25%. Also, when people ask me like offline versus online and who is killing whom kind of a thing, I said like it is not, because like India is growing at 8 to 10%, and if eventually online and organized player become 10%, that's just hardly much of the market.
right. It still is a huge opportunities. That
Yeah.
15% itself. Yeah. Okay. Let's assume someone from the MSME is watching this video and he wants to understand what kind of benefits he gets over e-commerce procurement versus the conventional. What would be your message to those people? Like, what kind of do you have any case study or any kind of numbers you can throw that how you can enhance their overall supply chain?
I think the simple thing is we benchmark on quality, cost, and delivery. I
Right.
think it is for everyone, for them to see what are they able to get today versus what do they get when they buy on our platform, right?
Right.
Obviously, there is an assortment dimension, which is also pretty large. So if I take assortment combined with quality, cost, and delivery, I think they will start to see the benefits for themselves. I mean, we have north of 500,000 SMEs which buy on the platform. There's more than 150 categories. There's more than 20,000 plus suppliers. So instead of going to just three suppliers and trying to do it, now you have access to 20,000 plus suppliers who are trying to build the largest assortment of the country, as well as getting the product delivered at your doorstep with a far more sort of like guarantee that there was no sort of like a sort of unpredictability or in terms of any mishandling that has happened while the product was shipped and delivered.
So you spoke about, at max, we can only capture the 20% of the supply chain through e-commerce. And then maybe for further,
Over
you
next
also,
10-15 years, because I
yeah,
think if you see the consumer commerce journey,
yeah,
nobody knows what will world look like after 25 years. Maybe there will be drones kind of delivering products everywhere, and world may be completely different. So I can't predict that much out, but I think next 10 years,
yes.
I think if we cross 15 to 20% of the market, I think that can be a fantastic adoption of technology in the manufacturing.
So these are for the standard part, but for the custom components, I think you also have a Moglix business, right, where you can supply the custom parts as well. So could you please talk a little bit about overall your offerings? Like there is some finance solutions and Moglix business, e-commerce, of course, we understand, but what are the other ways you are helping the manufacturing industries?
So we basically said that we are a platform for manufacturing companies to buy products, right? So we continue to
Yeah.
keep adding products. In fact, last couple of weeks, we announced biofuels as a category, which we have just launched, because we
Yeah.
realized many of the people who might be using boilers, which are coal, and they want to get access to some kind of a green energy source, and they can typically mix biobriquette into that mix and kind of have 5% or 10% of that mix coming from that energy source, and slowly reducing the carbon emission that they are causing, right? So we continue to increase the number of categories. We think we launched packaging few years back, biofuels recently, but we do fabrication. So in that sense, we continue to look at what are the categories where customers would want us to provide those services. Now, some of those categories are standard products. Some of them require a certain level of customization, some amount of specification, sometimes of quality parameters. So, for example, for biofuels, we set up a quality testing lab also. So it measures the calorific value, it measures the moisture content, or it measures that the quality is preserved, so on and so forth, right? So whatever needs to be done, we end up setting those backend, because it's not just the backend of supply chain, but it is the backend of the entire quality testing, as well as kind of enabling manufacturers in some case of how do they build good quality products to serve the customer. The second brand that we have is Credlix, which is also very relevant for MSMEs, because Credlix enables supply chain finance for people who might be struggling with working capital, or sometimes many of the small guys do not have banks kind of arm twist them or do not provide them access, and therefore Credlix can be a platform which many of them can use to access working capital financing. And since we understand supply chain, many of those guys not just use Credlix, but they also want to figure out how do we enable them to sell better, to buy better, so on and so forth.
So as you said, like in this last 10 years, there has been a great foundation set, and now people are talking about B2B e-commerce and they are aware of the benefit it can bring. But at this moment in 2015, what kind of challenges you still feel in the industry for when it comes to adoption of digital technologies or the new models like e-commerce for the procurement?
So I think we are still very early, I would say, because today AI is starting to enter every space of procurement. I think industry, as we spoke about, is still kind of dappling with becoming digital, and then AI becomes the second thing, right? But within Moglix, I think there are many AI innovations which are already there to enable scalability of customer experience, supplier experience, catalog experience that we are starting to create. I think so. In that sense, Moglix is as advanced in use of AI as it can be in B2B, as well as many a time similar to what a B2C e-commerce might be using. And I feel over the next 5 to 10 years, as the industry continues to have more of that adoption, again, they will start to see the benefits that the technology can bring in from efficiency perspective directly for both growth, depending on the company selling on the platform, as well as on bottom line if they're buying from us.
So coming back to manufacturing industry, we see that government has been continuously pushing some of the policies like Make in India, National Manufacturing Policy, and PLI schemes are also coming. I'm sure it is adding value to the overall manufacturing community, but do you think it is also reflecting directly on the MSMEs as well? Like, is it directly impacting on the business, or it is just still on the card on policies?
No, it is impacting businesses of people for sure, but you have to realize it's a very large industry, right? So if you're talking of a $400 billion industry with a target of $1 trillion, $10-20 billion is going to move hardly 5-10% of the industry, right? So while changes are happening, improvements are happening, you have to realize that when the industry is already large, I mean, and we are, as a country, we are still not in a position to pump in $100 billion, right? Kind of numbers, right? We saw the US came and committed $100 billion for just the semiconductor alone, and then Europe did something similar, and so on and so forth, right? So we are still in the global scheme of things, a smaller economy. So our ability as a policy framework to invest into the sector runs in 1 to 5, $10 billion kind of like models, right? Which will mean that it's incremental. Every year you'll improve by 5, 10. Now this is enabling you to start a flywheel, because then you expect more private investments and things like that. And I would generally assume that government has some of the schemes which are working. They just need to think about how do we grow it by 10x from the government side, and then the private flywheel starts to kick in to enable the industry to become larger and larger.
So you have so many categories of industrial goods. Do you also manufacture any particular category? Like, do you have your own products as well for?
So today I think we announced one of the acquisitions that we did, which is on the paper packaging. So we acquired Khatima Fibers, which is into specialty paper feeding into the packaging industry. So we do manufacture that. We are continuously looking at how do we scale that. We do have a Bhilai facility which is focused on fabrication. So we have been a sort of a proud supplier in that sense to some of the marquee Indian national projects, whether it is the Parliament House, whether it is the Noida Airport, whether it is the Tal Setu. We have been part of some of these large infrastructure projects as well. And we continue to look at more manufacturing capacity based on where we feel that the supply ecosystem is extremely unorganized and broken and requires kind of standardization and enablement as a platform we can do.
But do you have this plan on cards where you can, for example, introduce your own power tools or hand tools, such kind of standard product, just like how we see in Amazon's?
So we don't typically like that strategy because we feel that platform should be a very deep relationship with those brands. We never would want to compete with those brands. We believe we can be extremely great partner online, offline for some of those brands, right? So I think there is a very different thought process. I think I don't necessarily like particularly some of these approaches that of the platform without naming a platform, because I think it's kind of, you cannot have a trustful relationship with the brands and suppliers if you are sort of thinking of competing with them, right? So, and then you're using the data and insights, which one can challenge whether it is owned by the platform or whether it is owned by the supplier or a brand and so on and so forth, right? So I think those are practices which, yeah, sometimes American companies are okay to follow. I think in India, we should be actually more cautious of what are the practices we allow and how do we sort of control and that those things are not sort of encouraged on the platform.
Just last question from my side. Your message to Indian manufacturing community, specifically people who are looking to enhance their digital presence, starting to look at adopting new models like e-commerce or on-demand manufacturing.
Yeah, my message to them is next 2 decades are super exciting for India. I think also if they want to leapfrog versus incremental, they have to think of alternate approaches. Most people have to give up this syndrome of that this is how we have done it, because the past way of doing hasn't gotten us to the glorious levels which China has gotten. So we got to be proactive, we got to be changing, and digital, e-commerce, new supply chains, new use of technology in manufacturing. I mean, those are the ways we can leapfrog and kind of short circuit the time versus otherwise we'll take 20-30 years to get there, right? So if you want to do it in 10 years, we have to use an alternate approach versus the age-old approach that we may have used in India.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Thank you so much. I think the key takeaways for me would be, there is a good sense of optimism in the industry, for the manufacturing industry. The next 2 decades are going to be the key for the whole nation, and digital transformation are the key if we have to leapfrog and get to the level where China is today. Thank you so much for talking to us and sharing the insights.